The ER doors blew open at 11:42 p.m. 4 military police officers flooded into Haven Ridge Medical Center, boots hitting linoleum hard, dragging 90 pounds of chaos on a steel leash. The dog, a Belgian Malinois, black muzzle soaked in blood, rear leg wrapped in a field dressing that had long since soaked through, was done letting anyone touch him. He'd already torn through one handler's glove. A second officer had a gash running from his wrist to his palm. The animal thrashed and snapped, and every nurse, doctor, and security guard in the room took a collective step backward. Dr. Adrian Klein called for animal control. Someone else called for sedation. Nobody moved toward the dog. Then a woman stepped out from the far end of the room. She didn't run. She didn't call out. She just walked forward steady, unhurried, and crouched down about 4 feet from the animal. She said something, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. A few words, low and deliberate, in a sequence that sounded almost like a code. The dog went still. He lowered his head. He placed his muzzle into her open hand. The room didn't breathe. Who was she? And what did she say? If you're new here, this channel tells the stories that don't make the headlines, the ones about ordinary people carrying extraordinary weight. If that's something you want more of, hit subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss what's coming next. Mara Vane had worked the night shift at Haven Ridge Medical Center for 3 years, and in that time, she had become the kind of person people relied on without ever thinking too hard about why. She was 32, medium height, kept her dark hair pulled back tight. She moved through the ER with the economy of someone who had learned long ago that wasted motion cost time, and time cost lives. She didn't make small talk at the nurses' station. She didn't share meals in the break room. She showed up, she worked, and when the shift ended, she left. Her colleagues had settled on a comfortable explanation for all of this. She's just private, maybe a little cold, competent, undeniably competent. But the kind of person you didn't bother getting to know because she clearly didn't want to be known. What they noticed, without being able to explain, Mara always positioned herself near the door. She clocked exits before she clocked faces. In the middle of a trauma case, when everyone else's voice climbed half an octave, hers dropped. She had the stillness of someone who had been in worse rooms than this, and had learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Nobody asked where that came from. It was easier not to. Dr. Adrian Klein had worked alongside her for 2 of those 3 years. He was skilled, genuinely skilled, the kind of attending physician who knew it and let you know he knew it. He ran his section of the ER with the confidence of a man who had never been seriously wrong, which meant he had also never seriously reconsidered anything. Mara fell outside his framework. She was a nurse who occasionally made calls he hadn't authorized, who caught things before he did, who never seemed to need his approval. He had decided early on that she had a boundary problem, and he had never revisited that conclusion. Roland Pike, the hospital's administrator, was a different kind of problem. He was not a cruel man. He was simply a man who had spent 20 years learning to prioritize the institution over the individuals inside it. Reputation, liability, optics, these were his native language. People were, to him, mostly variables in a risk equation. Sergeant Calendor came through the ER doors at 11:42 p.m., with 3 other military police officers and a dog that wanted to kill everyone in the room. He was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, and wore the expression of a man carrying more than the leash in his hand. When the room fell apart around him, doctors retreating, security backing off, Klein calling for animal control, Door's eyes moved through the crowd with a specific kind of purpose, like he was looking for someone he already knew was there. The dog's name was Bracken. Calendor said it once, sharply, when one of the younger nurses took a step forward with a sedation kit. Bracken swung toward her and the needle clattered to the floor. The nurse didn't try again. The field dressing on Bracken's rear leg had been applied fast, by someone who knew what they were doing but didn't have time to do it well. The wound underneath was deep, a jagged tear running from the mid-thigh down toward the joint, edges dark with early infection. Without proper treatment, the leg would be the least of it. Sepsis moved fast in animals pushed past their limit, and Bracken had been pushed well past his. Adrian Klein stood at the edge of the situation with his arms crossed. "We need animal control," he said, "or a veterinary team. This is not what this facility is equipped for." "He'll be dead before animal control gets here," Door said. His voice was flat. Not angry, just certain. The way people are certain about things they've already done the math on. "That's not my call to make." "Then whose is it?" Klein didn't answer. Around them, the ER had reorganized itself into a wide, uncomfortable ring staff pressed against walls, a security guard with his hand near his radio, 2 of Door's officers holding their positions with the look of men who had already failed at this several times tonight. Bracken stood in the center of it all, chest heaving, teeth bared, The leash pulled taut. His eyes were wild but not empty. There was something in them beyond pain, something closer to grief. Mara had been watching from the supply corridor entrance for 40 seconds before she moved. She didn't announce herself. She walked out into the open space between the ring of people and the dog, and she said, "Let the leash go slack." Klein turned. "Vane. Not drop it. Slack." She didn't look at him. He needs to feel the pressure come off. Dorr looked at her for one long moment. Then he let the leash go slack. Mara lowered herself to one knee, about 4 feet out, not lunging distance close enough to be real. She kept her eyes slightly down, shoulders turned at an angle, body language pulling inward rather than projecting forward. Then she spoke. Low, deliberate, a short sequence of words in a specific order, not a plea, not a command in the way most people use the word, but something that sounded like a protocol. Like the opening of a conversation that had rules both parties already knew. Bracken stopped pulling. His ears, which had been flat and angled back, shifted. Not fully forward, but enough. His chest still heaved. The growl didn't disappear entirely, but it dropped in register, moved from the front of his throat to somewhere deeper, less certain. Mara stayed still. She waited. 15 seconds. Then Bracken took one step toward her, then another. He put his nose to her outstretched hand, inhaled once, and slowly, like something heavy being set down, lowered his head and rested his muzzle against her palm. The room remained absolutely silent. Dorr exhaled. One of his officers said something under his breath that nobody caught. A nurse near the back wall had both hands pressed over her mouth. Adrian Klein was staring at Mara with an expression he hadn't fully worked out yet, somewhere between professional offense and something he didn't have a clean name for. Callan Dorr was not staring at her with surprise. He was staring at her the way you look at someone you thought you'd never see again. The paperwork started before Bracken was even fully sedated. Roland Pike appeared in the ER at 12:20 a.m., not because he'd been called, but because someone on the night staff had sent a message up the chain, and Pike had a habit of showing up when things had the potential to become problems. He stood in the doorway of the supply corridor, watching 2 nurses assist Mara in cleaning and redressing the wound, and the expression on his face was the particular kind of neutral that meant he was already calculating. Adrian Klein found him there 20 minutes later. "You saw it?" Klein asked. "Enough of it." She had no authorization to intervene. No veterinary certification, no clearance from the military unit. "I know," Pike said. He wasn't disagreeing. He was thinking. The meeting was called for 8 a.m. the following morning. Mara received the notice at the end of her shift, slipped under the break room door in a sealed envelope with Pike's name on the return line. Inside, a single paragraph informing her that her conduct had been flagged for review and requesting her presence before the administrative panel. She read it once, folded it, and put it in her jacket pocket. The panel was Pike, Klein, and Cedric Vale, a hospital board member who came in from outside and sat at the end of the table with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to speak often to make himself felt. Mara sat across from them without a union rep, without notes, without the look of someone who was afraid. They went through it methodically. The unauthorized intervention, the absence of veterinary credentials, the military unit protocols she had apparently understood without being briefed on. The calm that, under sufficient examination, started to look less like temperament and more like training. Then Klein put a printed document on the table and slid it toward her. "Your personnel file has a gap," he said. 5 years. The notation reads, "Administratively consolidated." Can you tell us what that means? Mara looked at the document. Then she looked at Klein. "My nursing license is current," she said. "My certifications are on file. Everything required for my position at this hospital is documented and valid." "That's not what I asked. It's what's relevant to my employment here." The silence that followed was the kind that committees use as pressure. Mara didn't fill it. Pike leaned forward. "Mara, nobody in this room is accusing you of anything. We're trying to understand." "With respect," she said, "you're trying to build a case. Those are different things." Vale spoke for the first time. "You're being placed on restricted duty pending the outcome of this review. You'll remain on staff, but you will not have patient contact, and you will not have access to the canine currently in our care." Mara held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and stood. She was almost at the door when Klein said, "The notation, administratively consolidated. It's not standard military language, not standard federal HR language. We looked." She stopped, didn't turn around. "No," she said. "It isn't." She walked out. In the parking lot, 2 rows from the entrance, a man in a gray sedan sat with a laptop open on the passenger seat. He had been there since 7:45 a.m. His name was Warren Sable, and he was not surprised by how the meeting had gone. He had been expecting exactly this. In fact, he had been watching Haven Ridge Medical Center for 3 months, long before Bracken ever came through those doors. The meeting, the review, the notation in Mara's file being discovered. None of it was coincidence. He had needed the hospital to start asking questions, because a hospital asking questions about Mara Vane was a problem he could manage. Mara Vane speaking freely was not. The restricted duty assignment meant a badge that no longer opened the ER doors. Mara spent the first day of it doing inventory in the third-floor supply room, a task that required no medical judgment and no patient contact, which was precisely why Pike had assigned it. She counted gauze rolls and IV bags and noted expiration dates on antibiotic stock, and she did all of it with the same focused calm she brought to everything else, because falling apart in a supply closet wasn't going to help anyone. At 2:17 p.m., Callan Dorr found her there. He had changed out of his uniform. Civilian clothes, which on him looked like a costume the posture didn't change with the outfit. He closed the supply room door behind him and didn't bother with preamble. "The decision to bring Bracken to this hospital wasn't mine," he said. "Someone above me made that call. Someone who knew this was where you were working." Mara set down the box she was holding. "How long have you known I was here?" 6 weeks. He held her gaze. "I found you through a benefits claim cross-reference your nursing license renewal flagged against a restricted personnel database I had access to through the investigation I was already running. I didn't report it, and I didn't come to you, because I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with before I put you in anyone's line of sight. I was trying to protect the approach. I know that's not a perfect answer." "It's not," she said, "but I understand it. There's a man named Warren Sable, Office of Investigative Affairs. He pulled your file 3 months ago before the dog, before any of this. He's been building something." "Building what?" "A version of you that makes whatever you know impossible to believe." She absorbed that without visible reaction. Outside the supply room, a cart rolled past in the hallway. Neither of them moved until the sound faded. "The mission report," she said finally. "It wasn't a question." Callan nodded. "The official record lists the entire unit as lost. Equipment failure, environmental factors, no survivors." He held her gaze. "You know what actually happened." "I wrote it down," she said. "Every decision, every order, every moment from insertion to extraction. Field medical log. I've kept it in 2 formats, an encrypted digital file on a server I control, and a physical copy in a location that isn't connected to my name or my address. Standard protocol for someone who understood, even at the time, that the record might matter more than she did. That log would contradict the official report completely. That's why they wrote me as dead. There it was, not dramatic, not delivered for effect, just a fact she had been living with for 5 years. They had not killed her. They had done something she sometimes thought was worse. They had erased her, taken her name off the living record, folded her into an administrative notation, and trusted that a person with no official existence had no real way to cause them trouble. What they had underestimated was how long she could wait. Callan looked at her steadily. "The people who signed that report, a former general and a defense contractor with 9 figures in government contracts, they're not going to let a witness resurface without a fight." "I know. Sable is using the hospital review to discredit you before you say anything on the record. If they can establish you as an unstable employee with a falsified background, your medical log becomes the work of someone with a history of deception." He paused. "They're not wrong that it's an effective strategy." "No," Mara said. "They're not." She picked up the box again and placed it on the correct shelf. Then she turned back to face him. "Bracken," she said. "The unit he was assigned to. His handler." Callan's jaw tightened. "Sergeant Dale Pruitt. 12 years. He was in the unit when he stopped. Started again. He was there." "I know he was there," Mara said quietly. "I was the one trying to keep him alive." The supply room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "Pruitt trusted that dog with everything he had," Callan said. "When he didn't come back, Bracken stopped functioning. Wouldn't respond to anyone. 3 different handlers tried. He's been classified as unrecoverable." Mara looked at the closed door. "He recognized a command," she said. "That's not unrecoverable. That's grief. The thing about secrets kept inside bureaucracies was that they didn't stay buried because they were well hidden. They stayed buried because the people who knew the truth had more to lose from telling it than from staying quiet." Mara had understood this for 5 years. What she hadn't understood until now was that someone on the inside had decided the math had changed. Callan came back the following evening with a name and a folder. The name was General Harold Mercer, retired, 18 months ago. Under circumstances the public record described as voluntary. The folder contained what Callan had been quietly assembling for months. a thread connecting Mercer's unit authorizations to the mission in question, a defense contractor called Vantage Solutions that had billed the government for equipment and personnel on that mission, and a series of after-action amendments filed in the 72 hours following the incident, amendments that had systematically rewritten the cause of casualties from command error to environmental factors. Mara read through it at the small table in the break room on the 3rd floor, the one nobody used after 9 p.m. Callan sat across from her and let her read. When she finished, she set the last page down flat. Pruitt knew about the amendments, she said. He found out 8 months before he died. He started asking questions through the right channels. Callan's voice was careful. The right channels led back to Mercer's people. And then he was assigned to a mission and didn't come back. That's what I believe. I can't prove it yet. Mara was quiet for a moment. Outside, the hospital moved around them, the low percussion of a place that never fully slept, carts and monitors and distant voices. Bracken wasn't brought here by accident, she said. No. Someone inside the system who knew the cover-up and knew about you made the call. They wanted Bracken near you because Bracken is the last living connection to Pruitt, to the mission, and to everything the official report buried. Callan leaned forward. If you come forward as a witness, Bracken's assignment records become relevant. Pruitt's service history becomes relevant. The whole thread pulls. And Sable is here to make sure I don't come forward. Or to make sure that if you do, nobody listens. She thought about the 5 years. Not the logistics of them, she had made a kind of peace with the logistics, but the texture. The weight of existing without a record. Every day at this hospital had been a version of the same quiet calculation. Stay small, stay useful, don't give anyone a reason to look too closely. She had told herself it was survival. She had told herself she was protecting something. What she hadn't let herself fully examine was what it had cost. Pruitt was dead. The men and women who had gone into that terrain with her were listed as casualties of equipment failure and bad weather. Their families had been given folded flags and a version of events that bore no resemblance to what had actually happened. And Mara had been alive the entire time, the one person who could have said that's not what happened, and she had said nothing. Because saying something meant surfacing, and surfacing meant becoming a target. She looked at the folder on the table. There's a General Ilara Voss, Callan said. Inspector General's office. She's been running a parallel inquiry into Vantage Solutions for 14 months. She doesn't have enough yet. She needs a witness with direct knowledge of the mission. She needs my log. She needs you. Mara sat back. The break room hummed around her, fluorescent and quiet. If I do this, she said, Sable's people will move fast. Yes, Leora. The others in your unit who know pieces of this, they become liabilities to him the moment I surface. Callan's expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. I need to warn her, he said. Tonight, Mara said. Don't wait until morning. He was already reaching for his phone. He sent the message to Leora Reyes at 9:30 p.m., a short, direct text telling her to stay out of the hospital until further notice, and not to discuss anything related to the mission or Mara's name with anyone. Leora read it. She replied, Understood. Be careful. She was already inside the building. Leora Reyes had come in through the side entrance an hour earlier to retrieve personal items from her locker. A quick errand. Something she'd put off for 2 days. She had Callan's message on her phone, and was heading toward the exit when the ventilation panel on the 2nd floor of the east corridor separated from its housing and dropped 6 feet onto the floor below. She was standing directly underneath it. The impact caught her left shoulder and drove her into the wall. She went down hard, and the secondary trauma from the wall contact was what did the real damage: a fractured clavicle, a severe concussion, and a cervical strain that would take months to fully assess. A passing orderly found her on the floor 40 seconds later and hit the emergency call button. Mara was in the 3rd floor stairwell when she heard the overhead announcement. She was moving before it finished. She came through the east corridor doors at a run and dropped to her knees beside Leora before anyone had established a proper perimeter. The orderly who'd found her was trying to keep her still. Leora was conscious but not tracking, eyes open, responses delayed, left arm held at an angle that confirmed the clavicle immediately. Don't move her head, Mara said. She wasn't asking. Her hands were already at Leora's neck, checking alignment, reading what was there. Get Klein. Tell him probable C-spine involvement and closed head injury. Move. The orderly moved. Adrian Klein arrived 90 seconds later. He took in the scene Mara already running a systematic assessment, vitals being called out to the nurse who had appeared behind her. Leora stabilized in a position that reflected training most ER nurses didn't carry, and he made a decision without announcing it. He stepped in beside her and they worked. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't friendly. But it was functional in the way that two people with genuine competence are sometimes functional when the situation is larger than their friction. Klein called the surgical consult. Mara managed the cervical stabilization until the team arrived. When the gurney came, they transferred Leora together without a word exchange that wasn't clinical. Leora made it to surgery. Afterward, Klein found Mara in the east corridor, standing near the place where the ventilation panel had come down. The panel itself had been moved to the side wall. The empty housing above gaped open in the ceiling. "You're on restricted duty," he said. It came out less like an accusation than it had in his head. "I know." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You were good in there." Mara didn't respond to that. She was looking at the ceiling housing. "It's bolted," she said. 4 anchor points. You don't lose all 4 at the same time from standard wear." She looked at him. "Do you know where the maintenance access logs are kept?" Klein studied her. Something was reorganizing itself behind his eyes. Some prior conclusion being stress-tested against the current evidence. He had built a comfortable picture of Mara Vane over 2 years. Difficult. Overreaching. A boundary problem. The picture had been sufficient until about 48 hours ago, and now it kept failing to account for things he was actually seeing. "Pike's office," he said finally. "Maintenance logs are filed through facilities management. They'd be in the shared drive under Pike's administrative access. Can you get them?" The question sat between them. Klein was not a brave man by instinct. He was a man who had spent his career in controlled environments where intelligence and protocol kept the variables manageable. What Mara was asking him to step into was not a controlled environment, and they both knew it. "What am I going to find?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "But Leora texted me a warning 2 hours before that panel came down, and now she's in surgery." Klein looked at the ceiling one more time. Then he pulled out his phone and called the facilities manager's after-hours line. The maintenance log showed a guest access code entry at 10:58 p.m., 78 minutes before the panel came down, and 88 minutes after Callan had sent Leora the warning. Klein pulled it up on his laptop in the empty physician's lounge and turned the screen toward Mara without saying anything. She leaned in and read it twice. The access point was the second-floor East Corridor maintenance terminal, the same one that controlled the ventilation housing above the spot where Leora had been standing. The guest code was a temporary credential, the kind issued to outside contractors and visiting personnel, not regular staff. "Can you trace the code to whoever it was issued to?" Mara asked. "Not from here. That would need IT, and IT reports to Pike." Klein closed the laptop. "Which means if Pike is covering for any of this, the trail disappears the moment someone asks the question officially." Mara straightened up. She had known this was coming, had known it in the abstract for 5 years, and known it concretely since Callan had said Sable's name, but there was a difference between knowing a thing and standing inside it at 2 a.m., in a hospital lounge with a maintenance log on a screen, and a woman in surgery 1 floor below. Warren Sable appeared in the doorway. He was unremarkable to look at middle 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of face that moved through rooms without catching on anything. He was dressed in slacks and a collared shirt, no tie, the particular casualness of a man who wanted to appear unthreatening while being the most dangerous person in the building. "Dr. Klein," he said. He didn't look at Klein when he said it. He was looking at Mara. "I've been hoping to speak with Miss Vane directly." "This isn't a good time," Klein said. "It rarely is." Sable stepped into the room. He moved without urgency, which was its own kind of pressure. "Miss Vane, I want to be straightforward with you. The review that's been initiated here, the questions about your background, your qualifications, I can make all of that significantly more complicated, or I can make it go away entirely. That depends on some choices you make in the next day or so." Mara looked at him. "The medical log," she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. There are people who have structured their careers and their finances around a particular account of events. A document that contradicts that account, especially one originating from someone whose official record lists them as deceased, creates significant instability. "It creates accountability," she said. "That's different. For the families of the people who died on that mission," Sable said, and his voice stayed level, which was the worst thing about it. The official account has already provided closure. Reopening it doesn't bring anyone back. It only causes more damage. "You had a panel dropped on a soldier tonight," Mara said. "Don't talk to me about damage." Something moved briefly across his face, not guilt, but the recalibration of a man who had just confirmed that she knew more than he'd hoped. "I don't know what you're referring to," he said. 78 minutes, she said. "That's how long between the access code entry and the panel coming down. We have the log." Sable looked at Klein, then back at Mara. He was smooth again, unhurried. "Logs can be interpreted many ways," he said. especially by someone whose credibility is already under formal review. He paused. Think carefully, Miss Vane. You've built something here. Quiet life. Useful work. I'd hate to see it become collateral damage. He left without waiting for a response. The lounge felt different after he was gone, smaller, the walls slightly closer. Klein stood very still. He just threatened you. Yes. In front of a witness. He's not worried about you, Mara said. Not yet. She looked at the closed door. He's going to move on the review tomorrow. He'll push Vale to finalize a finding before the Inspector General's inquiry gets far enough to matter. If they can put a formal record of misconduct on me before I say anything on the record, the log becomes the testimony of a discredited employee. Klein sat down slowly. The word discredited landed on him in a way it hadn't before because he understood, now, that he had been part of building that picture. The review he had participated in, the file notation he had pressed her on, the 2 years of treating her competence as a threat to his authority rather than a resource. He had not intended to be useful to Warren Sable. But intention wasn't the same as impact. What do you need? He said. Mara turned from the door and looked at him directly, perhaps for the first time in 2 years of working in the same building. I need you to decide, she said, which side you're on. Klein gave her his answer at 7 a.m. He was waiting outside the third-floor supply room when Mara arrived for her shift assignment. He had the maintenance log printed and folded in his jacket pocket, and he had spent the previous 4 hours pulling every piece of documentation he could access without triggering an administrative flag. Sable's visitor credentials, the timeline of the guest access code issuance, the facilities request that had brought an outside contractor into the East Corridor 2 days before Leora's accident. It was issued to a facilities consulting firm, he said, handing her the papers, registered in Virginia. I ran the address. It's a mail forwarding service, the kind that exists on paper and nowhere else. Mara looked through the pages. How far back does the contractor relationship go? First invoice is dated 11 days ago, 6 days before Bracken was brought in. She folded the papers and looked at him. He looked back. He appeared to have slept approximately as much as she had, which was not much, and there was something different in his face, not softer exactly, but less defended, like a man who had spent the night arguing with himself and arrived at a conclusion he hadn't expected. I owe you an apology, he said. The way I've handled the last 2 years, the review, the way I talked about you in that meeting, I was protecting my own sense of order. That's not a good enough reason. Mara was quiet for a moment. I know why you did it. That doesn't make it right. No, she said. It doesn't. She put the papers in her bag. But it means you understand what's actually happening here, which is what I need right now. They found Callan Dorr in the hospital chapel not praying, just sitting in the last pew with his forearms on his knees, staring at the middle distance the way soldiers sometimes did in quiet rooms. He looked up when they came in, and registered Klein's presence with a brief, assessing glance. He's with me, Mara said. Callan nodded once and moved over. They laid it out on the pew between them, the maintenance log, the contractor invoices, the guest access code timeline, the documented connection between the consulting firm's registration date and Bracken's arrival at the hospital. Separately, each piece was explicable. Together, they described something with a clear shape. Voss needs this today, Callan said. Sable is pushing Vale for a closed finding on the review by end of business. If that goes through, I know, Mara said. Can you reach her directly? I've been in contact. She's been waiting for primary source material. He looked at Mara. She needs you on record, not just the log, your testimony. Direct account of the mission, the orders, the decisions that led to the casualties. Mara had known this was coming. She had known it since the supply room 2 days ago, maybe longer. Knowing it and doing it were the same distance apart. They had always been, not far. But the ground between them was not easy. She thought about Pruitt, about the specific quality of his voice when he understood what was happening and kept moving anyway, because the alternative was leaving people behind. She had written it all down in a field medical log in the dark, in conditions that made writing difficult, because she had understood even then that the record mattered, that the record was sometimes the only thing that survived. She had survived too. She just hadn't acted like it. Set up the call, she said. Callan pulled out his phone. While he dialed, Mara looked at Klein. Vale and Sable are going to find out what we're doing, probably before the call is finished. I know. That's going to be bad for you professionally. Klein considered that for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. Then he said, I've been wrong about enough things in the last 48 hours that I'm not sure my professional judgment deserves the weight I've been giving it. It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest, and from Adrian Klein, honest was harder to come by than eloquent. Callan held the phone out to Mara. General Ilara Voss answered on the second ring. The call lasted 41 minutes. Mara spoke without notes, without hesitation, in the flat, precise language of someone recounting events they had never allowed themselves to forget. She gave Voss the mission timeline, the command decisions, the moment the situation fractured and why, and the sequence of events that had produced 11 casualties, and one survivor whose existence had subsequently been administratively erased. She described the field medical log, its format, its chain of custody, and the transmission method she would use to deliver it securely within the hour. Klein and Callan sat on either side of her and did not speak. When she finished, Voss was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Miss Vane, I need that log transmitted to my office immediately. After that, stay inside the hospital and stay visible. Do not give anyone a reason to move you." "Understood," Mara said. "And Miss Vane." A pause. "I'm sorry it took this long." Mara didn't answer that. She handed the phone back to Callan, opened her encrypted file application, and transmitted the log to Voss's secure inbox. The confirmation came back in 4 minutes. It was done. Warren Sable found her in the second-floor east corridor at 9:47 a.m. He had clearly received word that something had shifted. The careful unhurriedness was still present, but underneath it was a new quality, the compressed energy of a man running out of moves and aware of it. Cedric Vale had gone quiet since the previous evening. Roland Pike had called in sick, which was its own kind of answer. "Whatever you think you've set in motion," Sable said, "you need to understand that an informal call to a general officer does not override a formal administrative finding. The review is going to be suspended," Mara said. "Within the hour, probably. You already know that." He stopped. She looked at him steadily. This was the moment she had been moving toward. Not the call with Voss, not the documents, but this. The moment where the person who had spent 5 years keeping her small had to stand in a corridor and understand that it hadn't worked. "You needed me afraid," she said. "That was the whole architecture of it. Discredit the witness, close the file, move on. It worked for 5 years because I cooperated with it." She paused. "I'm not cooperating anymore." Sable looked at her for a long moment. The face designed to move through rooms without catching, finally caught on something, and what it caught on was a woman who had stopped pretending she didn't exist. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator. He was met there by 2 investigators from the Inspector General's office, who had arrived through the hospital's administrative entrance 20 minutes earlier. The conversation that followed was not brief. The formal findings came in stages over the following 3 weeks. General Harold Mercer and the senior leadership of Vantage Solutions were named in a federal investigation. The mission report amendments were entered into evidence. The decision to list Mara as killed in action was officially reversed and her complete service record restored. The administrative notation administratively consolidated. 5 years of erasure compressed into 2 words was struck from every file it appeared in. Warren Sable cooperated with investigators. He had not been a monster. He had been a man who made one wrong choice and then spent years making smaller wrong choices to protect the first one, until the architecture of it was load-bearing and he couldn't see a way out. That didn't excuse it. But it explained something about how these things worked, how good institutions rotted slowly, from decisions that each seemed manageable in isolation. Cedric Vale resigned from the hospital board. Roland Pike cooperated with the internal review. Adrian Klein submitted a formal written statement on Mara's behalf, unsolicited, detailed, and unambiguous, and returned to work in the ER as a quieter version of the man he had been before. Leora Reyes came out of surgery with her cervical spine intact. On the day she was discharged, she sent Mara a message that said, "I heard you didn't wait to be asked. Thank you." Mara read it, set her phone down, and went back to work. Bracken was moved to a supervised recovery space near the ER. The rear leg healed cleanly. The infection cleared. He stopped flinching at sudden sounds slowly, the way recovery from real damage always goes, not in a single moment, but in increments small enough to miss if you weren't watching for it. On a Thursday evening in late November, Mara sat in the recovery room after a double shift, her back against the wall, legs stretched out on the floor. Bracken lay beside her with his head in her lap. The hospital moved around them in its ordinary way. She put her hand on his head and he didn't move. Callan Dorr stopped in the doorway. Voss's office called. "The families are going to be notified next week. Real account, real cause." Mara nodded. "Pruitt's sister has been asking questions for 2 years," he said. She never stopped. "I know," Mara said. "I'll talk to her." Callan looked at the 2 of them, the woman and the dog, both still, both finally at rest, and didn't say anything for a moment. "You good?" he said. Mara looked down at Bracken, whose breathing had steadied into the deep rhythm of an animal that had stopped waiting for the next blow. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." She had spent 5 years making herself invisible, disciplined, patient, small enough to avoid notice. She had called it survival, and maybe, for a while, it had been. But somewhere along the way, survival had become a habit she was hiding inside. The people who died on that mission didn't get to choose silence. They didn't get to choose anything after a certain point. She had, and she had chosen to disappear. She wasn't disappearing anymore. Bracken exhaled slowly and pressed his weight against her side. Outside, the ER was moving. Somewhere down the hall, a trauma case was coming in. Mara gently lifted Bracken's head from her lap, stood up, and went back to work. There's something worth sitting with in this story, not just the conspiracy, not just the action, but the quieter question underneath all of it. How long do we stay invisible because it feels safer than being seen? Mara didn't come forward because the conditions were finally perfect. She came forward because she stopped waiting for them to be, because the cost of silence had finally outweighed the cost of being found. Most of us will never carry a secret that heavy, but most of us know what it feels like to make ourselves smaller than we are, to stay quiet when something true needs to be said, to let a wrong thing stand because speaking up feels like too much risk. Bracken wasn't broken. He was grieving. And sometimes what looks like damage is just a wound that never got the chance to heal properly because no one stayed still long enough to let it. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one about ordinary people carrying extraordinary weight, about the truth that survives when someone refuses to let it disappear, subscribe. We'll be here.